Uncover the terrifying truth behind your favorite foods, the dark side of corruption in the food industry exposed. The ugly truth behind the food industry is devastating. Workers in developing countries are often treated like slaves, working long hours for unfair wages in unsafe conditions. The industry's harmful practices don't stop there. Agribusiness companies often pollute the environment with pesticides and harmful chemicals, destroying ecosystems and endangering nearby communities. Lobbyists also play a sinister role, using their influence to protect the interests of corporations over the public good. To make matters worse, food safety is often compromised in favor of profit, leading to deadly outbreaks of foodborne illnesses. It's time for change. We must demand greater transparency and accountability in the food industry to promote fair and more sustainable practices. As consumers, we have the power to make a difference. The food industry is plagued by a global crisis of worker exploitation, with laborers from California to Bangladesh subjected to grueling hours, meager wages, and unsafe conditions. But the harm doesn't stop there. Agricultural practices ravage the environment, exposing communities to life-threatening pollutants and chemicals. And lobbyists consistently prioritize profits over the well-being of consumers, pushing for dangerously lax regulations and weak enforcement. The grim reality of foodborne illness is also all too common, with countless people suffering and some even dying from contamination. The good news is that change is possible, and it starts with advocating for a more just and sustainable food system. It won't be easy, but together we can create a world where everyone has access to safe, healthy, and sustainable food. Lobbyists have a significant influence on shaping food policy in the United States. They represent the interests of agribusinesses, food manufacturers, and other players in the food industry. These lobbyists use their resources and connections to sway lawmakers and government agencies in their favor. Unfortunately, this often leads to conflicts of interest and unethical lobbying practices. For example, food industry lobbyists may push for weaker regulations on food safety or labor practices, which can harm consumers and workers. In some cases, lobbyists have even been known to write legislation or influence regulatory decisions. This level of influence raises concerns about the fairness and transparency of the policy-making process. Consumers deserve to know who is influencing the food policies that affect their health and safety. The food industry is an integral part of modern society, providing sustenance to billions of people all around the world. However, behind the glossy exterior lies a darker, more sinister reality, one rife with exploitation, environmental degradation, and unethical lobbying practices. Let's take a closer look at the impact of food production on workers in developing countries. Many of these individuals live in poverty and are forced to work long hours in unsafe conditions for meager wages. Companies often take advantage of lax labor laws and regulations in these countries to maximize profits at the expense of workers. Women and children are particularly vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, with many being forced into the industry against their will. Moreover, agribusiness practices have led to massive environmental degradation, harming ecosystems and endangering the health of nearby communities. The use of pesticides and fertilizers has led to soil erosion and pollution of air and water sources. The consequences of these practices are far-reaching and often irreversible, affecting not just local communities, but also the planet as a whole. Another significant concern in the food industry is the influence of lobbyists. Lobbyists leverage their power and connections to shape food policy in favor of corporations, often at the expense of public health and safety. Conflicts of interest and unethical lobbying practices are rampant, and the general public is often left in the dark. This lack of transparency and accountability is unacceptable, and it's time for consumers to demand change. However, perhaps the most pressing concern regarding the food industry is food safety violations. All too often, we hear of dangerous and deadly foodborne illness outbreaks, many of which could have been avoided through proper regulation and oversight. Companies prioritize profit over consumer safety, resulting in a culture of negligence that puts lives at risk. It's clear that something needs to be done to address these issues, and it's up to consumers to demand change. We must support companies that prioritize sustainable and ethical practices hold politicians accountable for enacting stricter regulations and policies, and push for greater transparency and accountability in the food industry. Our collective voice is the most potent tool we have in bringing about meaningful change. In conclusion, the food industry is in dire need of reform. The issues we've discussed today are just the tip of the iceberg, and there are countless other concerns that require our attention. But with concerted effort and advocacy, we can make a difference in the food industry, shaping it into a more equitable and sustainable system that benefits all. The food we eat is constantly under attack from unseen dangers, putting us all at risk of serious illness and even death. Despite many shocking examples of food safety violations, authorities have failed to take action to protect us from these deadly outbreaks. It's time to demand change. Transparency and accountability must be at the heart of the food industry, and we need to empower consumers to speak out for their own safety. Let's not wait for the next tragedy to strike. Join us in calling for stronger laws and regulation to protect our food and the health of our loved ones. Uncovering the dark side. Uncovering the dark of the food industry is a jarring realization that demands immediate attention. The exploitation of workers in developing countries is a major issue that is swept under the rug by big corporations who care little for human rights. With measly wages, extended hours, and inadequate safety standards, these workers are stripped of their dignity and their rights. We must come together as a society to demand fair treatment for these hardworking individuals who deserve better. Furthermore, many of us are unaware of the environmentally harmful practices used in the agriculture industry, from industrial farming methods to the use of toxic pesticides and chemical fertilizers. Our ecosystem is threatened and our farmlands are destroyed. We must demand a change towards sustainable and environmentally friendly practices that preserve our planet for future generations. The influence of lobbyists in the food industry is another area of concern. Often acting as decision makers, these individuals prioritize monetary gains over public health and manipulate policies to favor their corporate sponsors. This unethical practice is unacceptable, and we must advocate for greater transparency and accountability in the food industry. The safety of our food is also precarious, with harmful pesticides and additives still heavily present in our products. The word organic is often misleading, and dangerous foodborne illness outbreaks continue to occur. We need to demand stricter regulations and standards to ensure the safety of our food and protect consumers. As consumers, it is our responsibility to take action and demand a socially responsible food industry. From being conscious of where our food comes from to adhering to high safety standards and demanding natural organic products, we can make a difference. Together, we can promote fair practices, prioritize public health, and contribute to a sustainable future for all. In conclusion, the numerous issues surrounding the food industry cannot be ignored. While corruption may not always be the root cause, the industry's lack of transparency, accountability, and concern for consumer safety perpetuate a system that prioritizes profit over people. It is up to individual consumers to educate themselves on the food they consume and advocate for change through their purchases and actions. Only through increased awareness and pressure can we hope to create a food industry that truly serves and benefits society as a whole. Society